an organist has to be constantly thinking about the younger generation. And it doesn't matter that you've got 25 kids surrounding or 5 kids surrounding the instrument. Let them touch the pipes. Let them figure out what the keys are. Let them sit at the console. Let them walk across the pedal board. Don't ever stop thinking about younger people.
Hello and welcome everyone to our Member of the Week interview. This week we are interviewing Stewart Holmes. Welcome, Stewart. Thank you for being with us.
Great to be here.
So diving right in, could you share a little bit about how you got into music and specifically into sacred music and playing the organ?
Oh boy. I can remember my very earliest days. I grew up in Summit at the Episcopal Church, and I was always fascinated with the buttons and knobs on the organ. And my mother was a professional soloist, and I used to go to church with her. And that just led to, I wanted to take organ lessons. Ironically, my organ teacher didn't want to take me because 4 or 5 years of piano was just not enough. So I went to another church in Summit and took lessons with him for a year. The professor from my eventual undergraduate college, Millikan University in Decatur, Illinois, came out to the East Coast and came out to Summit to interview me and accepted me within a day of that interview. I went to college as a church music major. Ken LaRoe, that was his name, and I had a relationship. He was my faculty advisor that went beyond just being a teacher and a theory teacher and an organ teacher, and eventually suggested that I move over to music education with an emphasis in church music. And that is actually the beginning. When I graduated from college, ironically, I go back to Summit and I take up organ with the first organ teacher that refused to teach me. So, it came full circle a little bit. Yeah.
Right. Oh, okay, awesome. Was there anything that particularly drew you to the instrument, the organ? I mean, you mentioned that your mother was a paid soloist. You heard the instrument in service, but yeah.
Yeah, I was always fascinated by it. I went to a private school in Morristown and used to stare at the little Moeller Artiste organ that was in the chapel there, and just would watch him and think to myself, he's awful. I could do better than that. And, I was the butt of many jokes in high school because I was an organ player, but that just kind of set me off in the track. And I've always loved the instrument. I'm very hands-on oriented, and it was a natural for me. I'll tell a little background story, which is one of my family favorites. My mother was a soprano soloist. She had a brand new a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Do you know what that is, Shannon? A reel-to-reel tape recorder?
No.
See, you've just been aged. It was great big reels of tape, and they'd spool through. And my mother used it to use for her lessons that she would have in our house. I must have been 6 or 7 years old. My mother called me into the kitchen one day and she said, "Stewart, have you been playing with my tape recorder?" "Oh, no, Mommy. No, not at all." And with that, she turned it on, and there I was saying, "Okay, choir, let's go. Ready? 1, 2, 3, play." Click. The rest is history.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's great.
Yeah, we love that story.
All right, so going on, what are some of your proudest moments or some highlights from your work in the field of music or in sacred music? Yeah.
Oh boy. My organ teacher in college, the fact that he was so honest with me and moved me over from church music to music education was because he didn't see that I had the talent, but the relationship that he and his family eventually and I had just grew and grew, and he really helped me move toward keeping the organ active. And I graduated, I played a senior recital, but I think one of my proudest moments was my first church job in North Plainfield. I had a choir that eventually grew from 7 or 8 to about 20, 25 people. The molar artiste organ in that church just was inadequate. The choir loft was inadequate. We built the new organ. That was my first organ project. It was something that I'm very proud of. And working through that whole thing just fascinated me with again, it's that hands-on thing. I could watch this organ being rebuilt. The second was I got a job at Chatham, at a large Methodist church. After 17 years in North Plainfield, I moved over to Chatham. I knew that was an interim step because it was a full-time job for the former person that was there. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to play full-time. I had a job to put food on the table. So I stayed there for 3.5 years. They had a few conflicts between their music people, and I came in to kind of massage that and try to get the two choirs to talk to each other. That happened in the second year. I stayed for 2.5 more years, and then my wife was transferred. My wife's a minister. I was transferred to a church in Pearl River. I moved up north, and at that point, I said the commute was too much and the handwriting was on the wall. That's number two. Number three was going to Old Paramus back in 1993, where I am now. Again, the situation was they had a pretty active choir, but the organ was verschnut. And I lasted about 2 or 3 years before I started to say, this organ is going to die on us if we don't do something. And in 96, we signed a contract for Larry Nevin from New England to rebuild that instrument. So that's the third thing that is really sticks in my mind. All three are a mix of choral and organ, but I loved having a hand on building the old organ at Old Paramus. I ended up being kind of an apprentice for the organ builder. And I was the person that stayed at the church and helped him when he didn't have a second person to bring with him to, pass pipes or lift chests or whatever it was. So I learned a lot about the design of an instrument through that apprenticeship.
Fascinating. Yeah.
I hope it's fascinating.
It
I
is
love
fascinating.
it.
I mean, organ building, I remember learning in college about the first organs that were ever built. It was on the cutting edge of technology, and still,
Right.
Organ building, it's just such advanced technology. It is
Right.
fascinating.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it is. It's a complicated and very intricate instrument on one hand, and very grand and boastful. There's so many different variations, of course, of what makes a pipe. We should say it's a pipe organ, not an electronic organ.
Right, right. So you mentioned the builder for the second organ. Who was the builder for the first organ? And what was the name of that church?
That was Watchung Avenue Presbyterian Church in North Plainfield, and the builder, my second teacher back in Summit, Howard Vogel, basically was the consultant for rebuilding that first instrument, and he brought in a church organ company, and they rebuilt the instrument, and and then of course Larry Nevin was the second builder in my second church. So I've had basically 2 full-time jobs. I was at 17 years at North Plainfield, Watchung Avenue, and now I'm going into 27 at Old Paramus. So those are the only 2 jobs I've had, and no other church is going to take me ever because I rebuild organs. And they look at that and they go, we can't afford you. Yeah, what do you want to consider?
That's hilarious. No, that's a really fantastic and magnificent contribution. You're basically like adding 2 voices to the organ world. Okay. Do you have a favorite composer or era of music, if composer is too particular? And if so, why?
When I went to college, it was in the late 60s, early 70s. And the reformation of building a pipe organ was just coming into being. E. Power Biggs and a lot of those very famous organists early on wanted to bring back what, for simplicity, would be called the German ideal of what a pipe organ was.
Mm.
And it was a tumultuous time in organ building history for the American side. I was never trained, or my teachers really didn't push the romantic. In fact, I can remember laughing at Virgil Fox, who was the Riverside organist, and very flamboyant and charismatic and everything. And boy, could he play that instrument. But we'd laugh at him because he was, he was on that edge of moving away from that staunch and staid idea of what a pipe organ is for, to bringing it down to the people. It was just an important time. I started out understanding that the romantic idea of in organ music wasn't really popular. That was at my first college. I didn't play Franck in college. Franck ends up now being one of my favorite composers. I think when you talk about composers, a classical organist has to say Bach. I love Bach to no end. I find him challenging and difficult, intellectually superb. But Franck comes up pretty close to second for me, that romantic ideal, which of course now is more popular with organ music and organists.
Okay, thank you. If you had to offer advice to organists starting out in their career, what would you share?
Oh, wow, that is a loaded question. I do an awful lot of education work. Because I was teaching in the elementary school, I would constantly bring whole classes to the nearby church, Westside Presbyterian, and sit them down in front of the organ and tell them this is what an organ is. And we'd spend half an hour or so. I do a lot of educating with scout groups, with Rotary clubs at my church. So I guess it comes down to an organist has to be constantly thinking about the younger generation. And it doesn't matter that you've got 25 kids surrounding or 5 kids surrounding the instrument. Let them touch the pipes. Let them figure out what the keys are. Let them sit at the console. Let them walk across the pedal board. Show them all the different things that you can do. And hope that out of that mix, one falls through the mix and says, this isn't a bad idea.
Mm.
So that's my recommendation. Don't ever stop thinking about younger people.
That's great.
I think the second thing is for any organist, whether you're part-time or full-time, it is a demanding job that constantly throws roadblocks in front of you, and you can't get discouraged. I'll give a very personal story, which, I'm now, here I am at 72 years old, and I'm taking organ lessons again on improvisation. Am I that good at it? But I continue to try to stretch my experiences. And, to be honest with the viewers here, this past Sunday, I worked like a dog on a very simple arrangement of what God ordains is always good. Get down in front of for the postlude, and I blow the first 2 measures. And it is so frustrating for me. But, one has to plow on and,
Okay.
Figure out why I did what I did and go on.
Right. And always learning, just always growing.
Always.
Yeah, it's one of the things that drew me to the instrument as well. Just there's no limit to how much you can. There will always be something more, and you'll always feel your limit and be challenged by it. Yeah. Great.
Isn't that amazing?
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. So what brought you to the AGO, And what have you gleaned from being a member and also a leader?
What drew me to AGO? I think probably my college professor introduced me to that. We had a chapter out in Decatur that at Milligan. We had a pretty full, back in those days, we had probably all kids. We probably had 25 organ majors
Mm.
spread about across the 4 years, and got very active with going to AGO recital. When I moved to Summit after graduation, I wasn't in AGO for a couple of years, and I think somehow I just decided I wanted to get back in. Then I moved to Ridgewood and got involved with that our Northern New Jersey chapter. Why am I so involved? I don't know. It hits all my buttons, pushes all my pistons. You know, you know
So what would you say is, like, if you could recommend being a member of the AGO, or like compare the experience of being in the AGO, being a leader versus not being in the AGO, not being a leader, like how would the experience differ for an organist?
what comes across to me as you're asking that question is the single comment is probably one of the most difficult things I had to do was to walk into that first meeting because I didn't have anybody to drag me in. And I think that happens to be difficult for anybody who's going into a new situation. And, you're kind of in the background and if you're lucky, there are a couple people that come up to introduce themselves and get you to talk about actually yourself at that point.
Right.
So I think that that's a very important thing for chapter people to do. I think I have a monthly newsletter column in my church newsletter, a column in my church's monthly newsletter, let's
Mhm.
say. And there have there have been a number of times when I have written about if we don't support each other, we're going to find ourselves, we being the AGO,
Mm.
in difficult times. Now I'm writing that in my church newsletter and saying this AGO is so important. One of the things I didn't mention about the Northern New Jersey chapter, the Rodland Scholarship Fund was at the time between 1995 when it was established after John Rodland passed away. That scholarship grew to be the largest scholarship given in the United States to a church music major.
Mm.
And I was always intrigued when we interviewed candidates for that award. We had them play a masterpiece. We had them play hymns. We sang to their hymns, and we had them interview about what their aspirations are about church music. All four aspects kind of go together, and that really solidified my desire that AGO is a good thing.
Yeah, that's great. And last question. Could you briefly describe the instrument that you have at your church and its history?
Okay, we started out with, I won't mention the former builder name, but the console in 1993 was Klon console. Organists that are watching this will recognize the name because the piston settings on the Klon console, you could, it was literally that loud. And there were no resources for it. The pipe work was awful, overvoiced, used over the years. And we were faced, as that console started to break down, with trying to figure out how to rebuild it. And it became very apparent that we weren't going to be able to do that. By the time we came in, Larry Nevin made a proposal to build basically two instruments. The front organ is a two manual, and then the balcony organ is a second instrument of one manual. It's basically a great chorus with a couple of solo voices. So it's a three manual instrument. It's got 34 ranks of pipes and 19 voices that were supplied by Walker Technical.
Mhm.
Um, and you know, the two work very well together. You obviously, you know, the trained ear can tell the difference when I'm using an electronic or a digital stop, but most people can't.
Mhm.
So
That's wonderful.
it works well,
Yeah.
and I love it. I call it my baby.
Oh. um, so we've reached the end of our questions for today. Is there anything that you'd like to share with our viewers?
At my ripe old age, I look back on it and say I'm fulfilled with what I've been able to do.
Mm.
Um, I don't pretend to be the to have the answer for everything, but in my way, I've had a lot of things to be proud of, and this profession. Uh, you know, I think if I had really pushed, I probably should have gotten a master's degree the minute I got out of college, and then I could have stayed in church music forever. Um, but that was not what happened, and so you know, it's been a great run.
Well, let me ask one more question. So you mentioned a lot of integration between education and your church job, your work as a teacher. How have you found that to be beneficial for you, but also for your students?
It's been a perfect blend because I was able to keep track of all my music and pursue that and maintain a full-time teaching job, fifth grade, my entire career
Mm.
in Ridgewood. And I love working with kids. And to this day, I retired in 2015. To this day, I'm a substitute in the building that I taught in, period. And, you know, in the last 2 months, I've been in the building maybe a total of 8 days. And the rest, I just go to church to practice or prepare or whatever.
Mhm.
So it's a perfect blend for me.
Mm. Yeah, that's great to hear. It's one of the things that I want this interview process to inform people about is just that people sometimes thinking about going to be an organist or studying the organ think that it's just one size fits all, and it's not. I mean, even just the three people that I've talked to, Kathy and June and you, it's all such different careers,
Right.
all very successful and sounding like all very fulfilling. And that's something that I think is one of the most amazing things about our profession is so it really is flexible. It is what you make of it.
Right. Yeah. It is what you make of it.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you so much for being with us and really appreciate talking to you today.
I just love talking about myself and telling you about where I've been and where I am right now.
It's
Thanks for asking.
great to hear your journey. Thank you so much.
Take care.